a joy to be here. I don't think I've ever been in this building. I remember when I preached in Hood River, Oregon, I'd received a bulletin from Johnson Street Church of Christ. And I don't know how I got a hold of that, but I remember reading the articles from Miguel Zuniga. Is that how you say his name? And I think I've met him once or twice, and just a wonderful man. And last time I knew anything about him was down in the valley somewhere. Is he still there? Does anybody know? Do what? Oh, is he in the area? Okay. So thank you for the opportunity. And I think I have about an hour's worth of material for about 30 minutes time to talk. So buckle up, and we'll try to get through some of this anyway. And you have it with you. Lifeline Chaplaincy has been part of the medical center in Houston for over 30 years. I think we celebrated 35 years a couple of years ago. We're heading towards 40. It started in 1983. Virgil Fry was the first, I think, full-time chaplain with them. He was my boss for most of my 14 years. We now have a new guy who's been with us since last year, Justin Thompson, and Virgil is still associated with Lifeline for sure. What I want to talk with you about tonight is about the empowerment that we need. We all can do hospital ministry. It's not for everyone. It's really a selective ministry, self-selective ministry, because some folks that should not go to the hospitals, but especially if they like to talk a lot. So I have had people come up to me after a workshop and say, "Oh, you need to meet Sister Susie. She'd be great for this because she just loves to talk." And I'm thinking, I want to run as quickly as I can from Sister Susie. But we'll try to follow the handouts as best as I can. We're going to talk about coming alongside in just a moment. Before we do that, see if I can find my way back here. This is a video clip from the Cleveland Clinic, and it'll kind of give you an insight as to what we're talking about tonight. tell you how many times I've seen that, and it still touches my heart. What does that tell you? That tells you that everyone in the hospital is going through something. And so when we have volunteers, and Lifeline has about 150 volunteers in the 4 cities that we're in Central Texas, Austin, Georgetown area, the medical center in Houston, Tarrant County in Fort Worth, and also in Dallas. We have 150 volunteers that minister to everyone. We get referrals, and most of the time we visit Church of Christ folks, but there are hospitals that we have where we visit the whole patient population, sometimes people with no faith at all. And so you can do that too, right here in San Angelo. I'd like for you to turn, if you would, to the first page, and we're going to get there in a minute. People that are in the hospital sometimes are experiencing crisis. Their world's falling apart. Sometimes they're diagnosed with a debilitating disease. And when we come into the hospital, we're usually right there in the middle, when in the middle of that crisis. They've already received a diagnosis, or they wouldn't be in the hospital. And, this is a term that we don't want to hear anymore. During the pandemic, you heard it all the time about new normal, but it's still on the slide. So we want to help people to move from what was and what is now. Sometimes people get stuck, and we want to help them to move towards a new life, a life of hopefulness. And that's the direction we want people to see, that God is involved in their lives, regardless of what's going on with them. And we have a metaphor that we use a lot in our work, and in chaplaincy and in Lifeline chaplaincy. And this is, if you're a Navy person, you understand underway replenishment, or UNREP, they call it. One of our chaplains, Paul Riddle, was a Navy chaplain. And this picture is the USS Princeton, a destroyer there in the foreground. And what happens, and you've probably seen this or heard about it, maybe you've seen a movie with this, but these 2 ships, one is a supply ship, and they go in the same knot speed, in the same direction, exactly, the same course. And one, in this case, supplies fuel to the other ship. It comes alongside of this ship, the exact same speed, and provides what's needed. And then once the fuel is given, or personnel are passed over, or now they use helicopters, I understand, but sometimes they'll also give supplies. One does not try to be or do what the other ship is doing. It provides what's needed, and then they both go on their way. And that's exactly the metaphor, I think, that's helpful for us to see when we come into a hospital room. We're not there to fix a patient. We don't do anything medical. We're not there to take away their pain by telling them, those what we call negative religious coping, by saying, oh, God won't give you more than you can handle. If you just trust God. Things like that are not helpful in the middle of a person's pain. Certainly we understand that. But in the middle of the pain, we don't want to try to remove that. And the scripture that is helpful for us in this is 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 3 and 4. From the Message, it reads this way: all praise to the God and Father of our Master, Jesus the Messiah, Father of all mercy, God of all healing counsel. He comes alongside of us when we go through hard times. And before you know it, he brings us alongside someone else who's going through hard times, so that we can be there for that person just as God was there for us. And so I just like the way the Message reads that, because it speaks to what we do and what we just saw in those 2 ships. We come alongside of people to be present for them, to be that what we call a non-anxious presence, to listen more than we talk. 2 questions that people ask, whether they do it verbally or not. This is what they want to know when you go into a hospital room, or if they're dealing with a loss and they're grieving. Can you hold their heart in your hands? Is what they're dealing with something that you can just come alongside them with, even in their midst of their terrible suffering that they might have. What is your comfort zone in coming alongside of people? Sometimes we just need tools to use, and we have workshops with Lifeline, and I'll mention one when we conclude, to help people gain some skills, and listening skills, in coming alongside of others. And the second question is, are you safe? Can I trust you with the things that I'm telling you? And are you safe? That's what people want to know whenever you come into a room. The things that I share with you, will you hold it in confidence? Or am I going to hear about it, in church on Sunday? Or are you going to tell other people about it? People want to know that the deepest things that they tell you, the pain that they have, can I share that with you and trust you with it and be able to entrust you with those things? So the first handout that we want to look at is this statements that hospital patients would rather not hear. I'm going to go through some of these. We don't have time to look at all of them, but very quickly, that's on page 3 of your handout, I believe. Wow, look at the flowers here. It looks like you're getting ready for a funeral. Well, that's really helpful. How is that? I've just got a second to say hi. So why bother coming at all? Who's your doctor? Have you checked him out? So I don't have enough sense to check my own doctors out? Is that what you're saying? Did you know that massive doses of vitamins could have prevented that? Where were you when I really needed you? A couple more down the way there. It's sure hot in here. I'll tell the nurse to adjust the thermostat. No, don't change the thermostat. By the way, that's their home for the time they're in the hospital. And they're going to try to be a good host or hostess. But it's their room, it's their home. So don't be presumptive about that. Look down, fourth from the bottom. Have you checked into the treatment in Mexico? I hear, they've got a great treatment for the cancer you've got. A friend of mine standing outside church building after services, he had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He's one of my closest friends, song leader at church. And he said, Tom, my family, extended family, were encouraging him to go to Mexico because they knew of a treatment down there for what he had. It only cost $10,000, but they were willing to front all that money if he'd just go. He said he felt pressured from the family to go, and from this individual. And he said, I don't want to go. I want to be here with my family. I want to have my family around me. And so that's what he did, but they were upset with him. I've never seen you with your hair not combed and without makeup. Please don't do that. I already feel bad enough, and here you're pouring this on me. Here's what I say. People do sometimes tell me, we go visit them in the hospital, especially women. Guys don't care a whole lot, but, hair's unkempt or, they don't have makeup on, and they apologize for that. And I always say, anybody that's in the hospital gets a pass. You just get a pass. You don't have to worry about that. They're sick, by the way, and or they wouldn't be there. You don't mind if I sit on the bed, do you? Never, ever a good idea to sit on a bed. You may injure the patient, even if they invite you to. Don't do it. Now, I've seen once in a while, a wife just crawl in the edge of the bed, with her husband just to comfort them, and that's another thing. But if you're visiting and you're not that close, don't do that. You could injure a patient. You can dislodge an IV. I remember one time I was there visiting a patient, and I was going to have a prayer, and their hands were underneath the covers, and because they wanted to hold my hand. I didn't say that, but you do want to invite them if they want to do that. But they moved their hand from out of the cover, and their IV came out, and I mean, fluid was going everywhere, and I had to go get a nurse, and it was not a pleasant thing. Only on really rare occasions do I ever sit on the bed, and never with a patient in the bed. If there's no other chair, patient's in the bedside chair, and they invite me to sit down, I might do that, but never ever when they're in the bed. What about a couple more down? At least you don't have as many stitches as my grandmother did. That comparison is helpful. How? I just don't get that. I would prefer to have no stitches, By the way, anything that follows the words "at least" never needs to be said, okay? Anything that comes after that is going to come out wrong, let me tell you. Eat. Don't you want to get out of the hospital? They may be on some dietary restrictions. By the way, we equate food with health. But when people are sick, they may not be processing food well. And if we encourage them to eat, or we bring food in from outside and sneak it in, you could really injure somebody that way. Especially if they're not processing food well, they can aspirate and get pneumonia and could even die from that. So don't do that. Isn't what you had done considered minor surgery? If it's your surgery, it may be minor. If they're cutting on me, it's always major. I don't care where they do it, okay? My cousin had the same surgery, and he never even took a pain pill. So you're saying I'm a whip, I guess. And the last one down there, I'm sure you don't need anything from me, but call me if you do. Not going to happen. You know what? Not going to happen. All right. I think I have a little short clip here by Jeanette Cliff George.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, a presentation by Jeanette Cliff George.
Virginia, I thought I'd never find you. You look awful. And you lost your hair, and that was your best feature. I'm so glad that I found you, but I couldn't find any help getting here, going up and down the halls. How do people ever get anywhere in this hospital? And the nurses wouldn't help me. They are busy just talking to each other and watching the television, and they're laughing over some x-rays, and I just couldn't disturb them. And I'm so glad to be with you. I didn't know you were this sick. Oh, if there's anything I can do that I can fit into my schedule, I'd just be glad to do it, because we're all thinking about you. And oh, the flowers are just beautiful. It looks like they brought the funeral to you before you could get there. I don't mean they're funeral flowers. I didn't mean to mention it that way. I just don't say the right thing. I'm so ill at ease around sick people, and everybody in this hospital is sick, and it makes me very ill at ease because I feel guilty, but because I'm just fine, and there you are in this awful condition. But I sometimes have my own problems, you know. I'm not free of wearying and worrying, and people think I get along fine, but I don't. I know what it's like. I sprained my wrist about 3 weeks ago, and it's just been absolutely terrible. It's just, can you hear it clicking like that? It just, would you like to look at it? Maybe sometimes people that are sick feel better when they feel somebody else that's hurting. Yes, but I don't give into it. Oh no, not me. I don't give in to it. I'm not going to lie around a bunch of pillows and make people change their schedules to come and see how I am and all the things. No, sir, I'm strong. I'm going to resist it. I said I would just, pain, go away. Pain, go away. Have you tried that? I know it must be difficult with that cast on your arm, but you could try that. Oh, I'm just so sorry. Who is your doctor? Yes, yes. My uncle died under his care. But I'm sure it's going to be fine. Everything's going to be just fine with you. You're looking more animated just since I came in. And at first you weren't able to turn your head, and now you can turn it away. Just like that. It's just, I feel that it's been some help from our fellowship, you know, and you needn't worry about a thing. There's not a thing in the world to worry about, because people will come by and we'll come and visit you as long as you can have visitors. But we will be, and everything's going to be just fine. And you know, all the things you were worried about, you didn't even need to worry about them. You were worried about the things in the office and how it would go along. Now, let me tell you, you know that big box of things that you've been trying to go through for just weeks and months and weeks and months? Well, there was some little secretary from the young secretary's pool that she came in and zip, she went through those things like in 45 minutes. And Mr. Slocum was so impressed by her, he gave her a bonus. Isn't that not? And you were worried. I remember you were so worried about missing the shadow ball because that good-looking young man you've been going with was so interested in going there with you, and you knew he'd be disappointed. It all worked out just fine. I introduced my little niece to him, and she went with him, and they got along so well. They're going to the movies tonight just to get there. So you see, everything all turned out all right. And you don't have anything to worry about. No, your dinner has come. Oh, it really looks bad. I don't think you'll be able to eat any. Oh, I'll take the cookies if you don't mind. You know, cookies stay, and it's okay, even as sick as you are, cookies stay. And you remember how you used to love cookies? And how good fun we had? Well, we'll go back to that. God's probably just punishing you for something, and as soon as you find out what that is, everything will be fine. And I wish I could stay, but I've got to run. You know, there's a sale at Coldwater Creek, and you know how you love those sales. And you're not going to be able to go now. Of course, you don't look like you'd be wearing any new clothes for some time now. But I don't want to miss the sale, so I'm going to run out and just know I'm thinking about you, and I'll be praying for you, and I'll be getting my friends to come by, and I'll be trying to cheer you up just like I've done today. And it just makes me feel good helping people that are so miserable. And I'm so sorry about everything, but I'm going to leave. Now, call me. I may not call back because I'll be busy. You know, there's so many things happening, and every once in a while I will think of you. And thank you for the cookie. And I just want you to get well so you can get out of this badly run hospital. Bye.
I don't think she's had our training, so. But Jeanette Cliff George passed away a couple of years ago. She was a friend of Lifeline. She was an actress. Any of you are at least as old as me, you might remember the movie The Hiding Place. It was the life of Corrie ten Boom, and she played Corrie ten Boom in that movie. She's a great person. For the sake of time, we're going to move a little further down. You can look at some of these things yourself. I'll be sure I don't go over. Let me just hit a couple of these on the next handout. It's just good stuff. Virgil Fry put this together. Statements. Statements of patients would rather not hear. Some alternative statements. When visiting the seriously ill, if you'd look at that. Instead of, I don't want to bother you with my phone calls and visits, what does that really communicate? It really says, I really don't care. You might try instead, is this a good time for a visit? Instead of you got a long, hard road ahead of you, you. What does that say? You're in this on your own, buddy. You know? How about no matter what happens, I want you to know you're not alone. You know, I'm gonna be walking with you through this. Instead of my uncle had the same thing and he died, like she said in that clip, how in the world does that help? It certainly doesn't. Try what's going on with you lately. One of the things that I normally say when I first come into a room, if I don't know the patient, I might just say something like, what can you tell me about what's going on with you today? See, that's an open-ended question. They can tell me as little or as much as they want about what's going on with them. Sometimes it has nothing to do with their illness. They're concerned about their grandson that's over in Afghanistan or something. You know, they might want that. Might be important to them to pray about. Instead of God knows you can handle this illness, or I wouldn't have let you get it. So you're saying it's God's fault? And by the way, don't presume to speak for God ever. Philip Yancey says, I get nervous when people speak for God in ways that God hasn't spoken for himself. You know, I like that. Instead, you might say, in times like this, do you find your faith makes a difference? When we find out that people are religious, sometimes I say, oh, I've got a lot of people praying for me. Our whole church family is praying for me. At some point, and it helps in understanding their coping, is to say something like, so I understand you're religious. You mentioned, you know, people are praying for you. How is that faith helping you through this right now? And let them talk about that. Down the second from the last one, again, I'm sure God has a reason for this. Again, don't presume to speak for God. How about instead saying, there's a lot in life we don't understand, isn't there? I think you have a sheet talks about the world of the sick person. See that? Let's see, it's on page what? We need to skip over there. It's on page 6. It's on the inside there. This is a list that Dr. Bert Klein shared with a group of ministers. We had about 30 in the room, and he shared this. This has been probably a decade ago, and it was so good. I said, Bert, would you write that down for me? So I've used it ever since. And I think it's something that would be very helpful tonight. When we think about the world of the sick person, number one, when people come into the hospital, there's a lot of isolation. They come out of the world that they know, and they're introduced into this new world that's called a hospital. And sometimes, you know, I meet people that, 80 years old, they'd never been sick before. Now they're in the hospital. It's all strange. And so they're isolated. In other words, some of their friends don't come by for one reason or another. But they're in this little room, and this is their whole world now for whatever period that they're in there. The world of the sick person changes. They go from being an active, independent, in control, strong individual, and when you come into the hospital, you're given, a gown to wear, and you're told what to do. You become now a passive, dependent upon others, losing control because your whole life is ordered now, and you're seen to be weak. Third, your emotional world, inner world, changes. You go from some uncertainty because you have this new diagnosis, and as things progress, there's some anxiety that occurs, some worry, fear, sometimes confusion, frustration. And if people are in a holding room before surgery, sometimes it'll be from midnight before that they haven't eaten, and now it's 1 p.m. the next day, and they're in a holding room because the doctor has had other emergency surgeries. And so some anger can come through that, and even some hostility. So you can see how the emotions change in the hospital. It is a time of crisis. because people began asking those questions. Why, right after my retirement, we'd had all these plans, all these dreams. Why did it come now? And why me? And why now? And we began asking questions, how did God allow this to happen to me? So their faith is challenged as well. And finally, it can be a kairos time. There are two words in the Greek for time. You perhaps know these words. One is chronos, where we count down time, minutes, days, weeks, and years. That's chronos. But the Bible speaks of opportune time as well. And that word is kairos. And you find it in Colossians 4, verse 5. Walk in wisdom toward those that are without, redeeming the time, King James says. And Colossians 4, verse 5 in the NIV says this: be wise in the way you act toward outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. So it's an opportune time, and sometimes in the hospital can be a very opportune time for people. Are you giving me a signal? Okay. The world of the hospital is also a foreign territory. They leave the familiar from what they know, and they come to a different world. It's a strange land, and so they're admitted into this place like they're going into a foreign country. They're given an armband. They're asked a lot of questions about finances. Do they have time? Can they pay for this? Do they have insurance? Ask questions about how old they are, and so forth. They come into an institution with all sorts of different regulations and rules and schedules. There's different personnel. There's all of these cardiologists and surgeons and pulmonologists and all these other ists, oncologists, infectious control people, and so forth. They speak doctor, and translation is needed in this new place. There are routines that are given. Care is scheduled, meal times, visiting hours, tests, procedures, and on and on and on. What are the effects of all this? The effects of all this is that a person becomes a patient, a disease, a diagnosis, a treatment plan, prognosis. And so we lose some of our identity in this. So what can you bring whenever you come to the hospital room? You can bring you. You bring a gift of your presence. This non-anxious presence that we talk about, just being with people, is a gift. Not coming to talk, not coming to fix. Yeah, we might talk, but there's one thing that we tell all of our volunteers is, if you come into a hospital room and you're doing most of the talking, then it's probably not a good visit. Some folks just feel like they need to fill all the air up with their words, right? And I have a colleague that says some folks just suck all the oxygen out of the room, by their words. So don't be that person. You bring their real world because you're coming from the outside to them. You come from home to bring news from the outside, connection with the church, and a connection with God, because you are God's representative in that moment. So you bring yourself. Just have a couple of more things. We're not going to see this video. It's another Jeanette Cliff George. I invite you to read that poem on the last page. And it just invites you to listen, listen, listen. If you don't get anything else out of today, just remember, the most important thing you can do when you go in a hospital room is to listen. People tell their stories of all the events of their life. Sometimes there's an emotional connection with some other story that's happened to them. They'll tell that story. They don't know why. And you reflect back with them and listen to what they have to say, not to fix them, but to really listen. I want to close with this little clip. We saw one about empathy in the beginning, and Brene Brown from Houston shares this little short clip, just about a minute long.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions very diverse professions where empathy is relevant and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you can climb down. I know what it's like down here. And you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time. Because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I have one more slide, and I'll save it for the end. But want to give people opportunity to ask questions if they have any.
So I think one of the things that happens is sometimes people think of hospital visits and chaplaincy work and all that as being something that only professionals can do, or that it's what our church leaders do, and it's really something we're all called to do. And so I appreciate you sharing some very simple things there that remind us sometimes we don't need to be afraid of the situation, number one. Number two, sometimes we walk in and we say things that are inappropriate. And there is a way to learn how to engage people in those environments. And if you're afraid of it, the best way to do it is to actually just go with somebody. And to find others that are going. And so one of our incredible ministries we have here is our communion ministry, right? And many of you have served in that, but some of you haven't tried it yet because you're not sure what it's like to go into those homes of those shut-ins or in the nursing homes, whatever, and minister to those people. And I would invite you to get a hold of Nancy Dunlap and let her help you find somebody to go with and try it. The same thing with the hospital. There's so many in this room that regularly make hospital visits. And what Tom is sharing is something that they do for churches to train us on how we can move out of that comfort zone to go and be a comfort to others, to be Christ to others. And so he's offered to come and do some extra training if we want to do that, to find a Saturday or something, a Sunday maybe, where he can come in and take us through a workshop and teach us how to be more empathetic and how to come alongside of people. And but the first thing I would say is it just starts with you just taking that step and trying it with somebody. And so I appreciate you sharing. What were you going to say? Go ahead.
The one thing that I really appreciated, I was in Houston for a long time, and this is something that a lot of the churches there, just the average churchgoer, they're very involved in this. And,
right.
You know, I know some churches have really embraced it and others are kind of just now getting into it even still. But Could you just talk for a second about what you see in those people who are hesitant at first, but once they kind of get into it, what they go through and kind of how they have responded to this?
Well, for example, this summer we had I had interns, college students. She was from ACU, and she had never been in a hospital room. She was petrified. But she was encouraged to take this internship because she has some gifts of listening already, and she was kind of quiet. And so we have training every morning. We do didactics. We talk about different things. We read books. But then we do what's called mentored visits or shadowing visits, where they follow me in the hospital, and we don't. Our volunteers never go. We don't just throw them in the hospital room without giving them some training. They have some knowledge and some skills that they've learned, but we go with them in the hospital room. They follow us. They watch us, and then at some point we follow them, and then let them go on their own for a while. But later on in the summer, we were talking, and she said, "I almost went home." She lived in Fort Worth. She said, I almost quit." And I said, "What happened?" She said, "Well, she made connection with some of the patients, and she used and utilized some of the tools that she had, some listening skills, and by doing, she became more proficient at it. And then she said, now I go in with joy." And she had some really hard visits during the summer, but for 12 weeks she was going every day to the hospital, and over time she gained some what we call pastoral identity. She knew who she was, and she began to feeling good about being able to sit with people and not having all the answers, but just being able to learn to listen and to respond appropriately. Two things we say, there are two questions. If you don't know, people say, "Well, I don't know what to say when I go to the hospital." Well, that's probably a good thing. You don't have to always have the answer. I think sometimes I have church leaders that I try to train, and they're the most difficult because they feel like they need to do something religious when they go in a room. So two questions that you can ask is, tell me your statements, tell me more, and what happened next. If you can remember those two things, tell me more. People want to talk, just listen. Does that help?
No, that is great. We have some people at this church who are so good at this.
Yeah.
And I know that we're all going to be going through some sort of trauma at some point in our life.
Right.
You know, hospitals will find all of us eventually.
Yeah.
And just so you know, this is such great material, and I think that there's a lot of good that you guys are doing. So I appreciate you being here.
Yeah.
I have a two-part question that I was thinking about. We talked about, and from me sitting in the pew, we were kind of talking about how we interact with the patient. How do we interact with the caregiver that might be there? Because the patient may not be awake, or the caregiver is going through this event just as much. And so how do you balance that communication with them, or some helpful tips and tricks with that? And then the second part of my question is, I was envisioning adults when you're talking about this. Do things change when it's a child that you're visiting, or a teenager that you're visiting, with some of these do's and don'ts?
Wow, that's a lot.
You got 3 minutes. It is a two-part.
Two-part. Well, the first part is caregivers. I have a friend of mine that helps train with me sometimes, and one of the things he says a lot is if one is sick, two need care. Because there's a family system that's involved. So when we go in the hospital room and they have family there, just assume that everybody's going to need care. Because if one is sick, if somebody's sick in the family, they're all dealing with that sickness, that illness. So if sometimes the patient might be sedated or comatose, and I know quickly who the care is going to be. If the patient is non-responsive, then certainly the care is going to be to the caregiver immediately. We're not going to forget the patient, and there's ways to have prayers and such for those that are non-responsive. But everyone needs care, and the family system has to be recognized, because everybody is taking time out. They're changing shifts and schedules to rally around this person. So we need to be sure and give care to the whole family. Does that help? So it just depends on what's going on in the room. As far as children, I have a workshop that I do. My D-Men project had to do with ministering to children in crisis. And so different care is given. Children grieve differently. Children respond differently to illness than adults do, and we need to adjust accordingly. But I have chaplain friends that are pediatric chaplains, and their whole world changes the way they give care to children. They play a lot with children. You can have, children work out their grief and work out their illness in play. And there's a lot that can be done with puppets and other things that you do when you come into a pediatric ward. So, yeah, certainly the care is different when you're dealing with children. Does that help? Okay.
Hey, I appreciate you guys. Tom, thank you. Let's show him some appreciation.
Thank you. Thank you. I have one quick thing to share, a shameless appeal. We do have a workshop that's coming up on the 17th on a Saturday. It's all day. And I invite you, if you want to learn more, to come to Austin. And there's the address. And there's also a QR code if you've got a smartphone. And you could do it right here where you are, because we're at our office at Lipscomb University, Austin Center, and they provide space for us there to do this, and they have top-notch IT stuff, and so media centers. And so we can do this live stream as well. You can do it from your home, or a group of you can get together here and do it, or come in person, which is what I prefer. But that's going to be on the 17th, and if you don't have time to write this down right now, you can go to our website. It's lifelinechaplaincy.org, and register there online. The second thing is I do a ministry in times of grief during the holidays for anyone that's had a loss. It's called Empty Chair, Coping with Grief Through the Holidays. That's Saturday, October 29th, and that's only in person at Lipscomb University Austin Center from 9 to noon. It's only 3 hours, but it's a good little workshop. It's been well received. But I thank you for the opportunity of being here, and thank you for your time. God bless you all.